Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is another Red Pill Religion podcast, and tonight we're going to be talking about mythology. I have with us our a regular guest of ours, Mr. Brass from the YouTube channel Brass Wisdom. Check out his channel. Say hi, Mr. Brass, and all that.
Hello there. Hello there, everyone. I'm Mr. Brass. Nice to be on. Um, you got the channel thing?
I'll put it in the low bar after we're done. But
Yeah.
yeah. Currently, you have been doing a series on mythology, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the reason why I got into this is because I've been interested in mythology ever since I was in high school. I originally learned about the Greeks, I learned about the Trojan War, and I just sort of became attached to it, and I wanted to find out, more about mythology and from different cultures and see, what's popular. I did make exceptions because there is mythology in religions like Western religions, like Christianity and Judaism and Islam, but I cut those out deliberately because I wanted to have things that people like in America may not be familiar with.
Okay. All right. And we have with us the analytic alchemist. Say hi.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on tonight.
You're very welcome. And we also have with us founder of Red Pill Religion, Max Colby. Say hi, Max.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
All right. And I'm with Mr. Brass on the whole being interested in mythology. When I was a pagan, that was actually one of the things that I focused on was to be able. There was an actual study. I would call it a study. It wasn't organized, but where it was called bards, where we take stories, mythological stories, and take them apart, take them apart by their tropes, and then analyze what each of these trope structures means, and how they were put into a story. Because the pagan belief on mythology is that these aren't just stories that say how things happen, but they're also stories of history. If archaeology is to be trusted and believed, the human race is 100,000 years old. So it and we only have 10,000 years of that 100,000 years actually recorded before we started writing things down, primarily as a way of historical recollection. We used to use oral stories, and a lot of the times those oral stories were embellished or made so people would be entertained, so people would pay attention to these stories. Um, does anybody have anything to say about that?
Well, sure. I mean, well, for one thing, I will actually make a defense of oral traditions, depending on what the tradition are and who the people are involved keeping it and stuff like that. But there's, real reason to think that a lot of oral traditions may be more reliable over time or more accurate over time than written history. We have this bias to assume that, well, if it's in writing, it's more solid, it's more stable, and that's nonsense because while you can show that a story will change, like if you tell the same story to the same person and then have them repeat it, along a chain of 10, 15, 20 people, eventually the story has changed. But in the great oral traditions, they were poetic. They were written some kind in a verse. They were written in ways that they would be remembered, and it was considered the duty of the elders of the tribe or the priests or whoever they were who were keeping the traditions not to change the oral traditions. You don't change them. This, for example, is why, I mean, this isn't just Christianity, right? But it's one of the reasons you can see that Eastern Orthodox Christianity has changed very little in, since it split from Rome 1,000 years ago, and has changed very little from, 1600 years ago when they put the Bible together, and that's because they keep the oral traditions alive and they're very stable. You can say the same about Jewish oral tradition. You could say the same thing about a number of others too. I don't even want to just focus on the Abrahamic faiths, for example. Oral traditions can be powerful and written. Well, you're just trusting the historian, who may have an axe to grind. So I think it's wrong to dismiss oral traditions. Some are going to be stronger than others, obviously. But on the other hand, if you have something written down, just look how people will then start parsing the text and interpreting, like the unchanged written words. You can see this with the Bible. You can see this with the U.S. Constitution. You can see this with various laws. You can see this with various things. You get it written down, and then people start arguing over interpretation. And sometimes they'll come to wildly different conclusions reading the exact same words. So, I mean, oral traditions do matter. I think your ideal is that you have some of both, right? But I mean, I was just watching a podcast on a couple of videos from Joe Rogan, who's talking to various scientists who've concluded that there was some kind of great flood within the last 10 to 12,000 years, that wiped out quite a bit, and we have reason to think civilizations were lost. I mean, we can't, I can't prove that right now, but we have evidence of it. I was just listening to one guy, talking about, the Great Sphinx and how and he's not a Christian, he's not a religious guy. I mean, he's got no religious basis here. I mean, he's an archaeologist and working with other archaeologists, and they look at something like the Great Sphinx, and they see evidence all over the place that thing survived a huge deluge, like sheets of water coming down on it, eroding it very quickly. And how you can see through time it's been altered and changed. Basic over the last few thousand years, there have been multiple attempts to restore it. So the original Sphinx is gone, but there's all kinds of evidence that thing, is from a pre-flood civilization more than 12,000 years old. There's reason to think that's true. I actually find it kind of exciting. We're getting into an era where we're starting to see, we think civilization started roughly 10,000 years ago, but there's reasons to think no, there were civilizations before that, and they just got destroyed. I guess I should bring up the video. I don't have it here. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone, but this archaeologist was showing this footage. Like, the theory was that 12,000 years ago, sea levels were about 300 feet lower than they are now. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but when he shows it on a map with a computer, what it looks like if you just drop sea levels globally by 300 feet, and oh my God, there's so much more land there. In fact, for example, he shows that what we call the British Isles would not exist if the sea levels were 300 feet lower, because you'd be able to walk over to France, or walk over to Africa. Well, not for Africa, but yeah, you'd be able to walk over to what we call France and stuff like this. And this actually gives credence to the idea that there was a land bridge, between North America and Asia at one point. I don't know what quite point I'm trying to make about this, except that the myth of the flood appears to be a reality, and that we just have various, cultures having interpreted it and remembered it slightly different. But that it happened, we're starting to see modern evidence that it did. So, I mean, I guess it's just we should take myths more seriously, is what I'm saying.
Right, and Comrade Dimitri, you came in late after I introduced everybody, but you wanted to say something.
I was just going to say that Max mentioned land bridges in between Asia and the Americas. Yeah, we already know there was once one called the Bering Strait land bridge between Alaska and what is now Siberia and Russia, and that's where the Paleo-Indians came through, according to most historians and archaeologists. Although there's some new theories that suggest the Paleo-Indians came through the Polynesian route, transoceanic theories, which I think are very possible.
Yeah, considering how the Hawaiian Islands got people onto it, but with the whole land bridge thing, there is I believe that there is a at least a theory that the Strait of Gibraltar, um, the place that connects the Mediterranean Sea, actually was a land bridge at one time, that connected um Spain. It's either Spain or France with Northern Africa. I don't um I know I heard that in school, but I can't, I don't have any evidence or anything like that. It's just something that jogged my memory. Mr. Brass, do you have anything to say?
Yes. Another thing that I found interesting when you actually look at the cultures is they all have like a creation myth where, like, in Greek mythology, they believed, like, they had an opposite view of God than what Christians and Jews believe in, and Muslims, because we typically think of, well, God created the universe. Well, they have the opposite idea that where the universe created the gods. Um, so originally in like Greek mythology, you get chaos, like, which some of them have deified, but some of them they just consider them a prime reality, and basically at some point, the gods were just made from them. Like you originally got the heavens and the earth, which had Cronus and the rest of them. And, another interesting cycle that about Greek mythology is the fact that they always had a son conquering the father. For example, they had Cronus stab his father and wound him and overthrow him. They had Zeus beating Cronus, and they also had a big dispute that Prometheus and Zeus had was over information Prometheus had that Zeus would have a son that would try to overthrow him. So there was this overarching theme of having a son overthrow the father.
Well, and later on in the Greek mythology cycle, you had the story of Perseus, which I believe he was the son of Poseidon, who overthrew the gods completely. He went to war with the gods. The whole Golden Fleece epic ended with that.
Well, I
Well,
will say that even
actually,
then, go ahead.
well, yeah, actually, with the tale of the Golden Fleece, because I actually went into that one. Like Jason. Oh wait, no, I may be thinking of the Argonauts, Jason and the Argonauts. Um,
Okay.
Jason and the Argonauts is pretty neat too, although it ends on a very depressing note, where basically he completes his journey and everything, but he ends up being, really horrible to this woman that the gods made fall in love with him. He took advantage of it, and he eventually just dumped her, and she got mad and killed their sons. Um,
Yeah.
and then basically he tried to get revenge on her, and she ran away. And basically, he just spent the rest of his life as a wanderer. Um, he spent the rest of his life as sort of a wanderer, and he would, in his last years, he would go to the discarded, the decaying Argo ship. He would go and sleep in there, and one of the roof tiles just came and crashed on him and killed him.
The thing is, though, and I think this goes back with an issue that I have with mythologists like Joseph Campbell, who had some great insights, but also, he wrote The Power of Myth and The Hero with a Thousand Faces and all that. And he had some very good insights, but he also tended to wring the spiritual and the supernatural elements and reduce them all to, material and just psychological ideas. And that doesn't work. Like, I happen to know, for example, that if you investigate the ancient Stoic religion, which incorporated a lot of the Greek myths, they often had fairly sophisticated views of these things. Like Zeus defeats Cronus, right? Well, Cronus was the master of time. And so within the Stoic religion, they interpreted that as Zeus, the all-powerful father, who they also attributed to being the prime mover. That was an allegory of showing that Zeus was beyond time, could overcome time. Zeus was not even bound by time, let alone space or other considerations. I'm not saying it's exactly like the Christian idea of God, but their idea of Zeus was actually fairly sophisticated. They didn't think he was just this guy, but that he could take human form, not that he had human form all the time, kind of thing. I guess I'm saying there's allegories and metaphors and spiritual messages in some of these ancient myths that we miss. Like you just keyed on the killing of the father trope, which that is a common one, but there's still deeper layers of meaning to a lot of these things. I guess is all I'd say there.
Right. And I agree with that. You have other like mythology, for example. It really ultimately it served its purpose to tell a story of humans before we actually actually wrote things down. The whole it was an oral story. It was embellished a little bit to be entertaining, because nobody would gather around a campfire around somebody who is telling a boring story. But you'd also have the purposes of mythology is to tell some portion of history of that civilization, like the Irish Gaelic mythologies. They went through the history of basically where the Irish traditions and stories came from the Bard Taliesin and that whole entire story. And you have the Sumerian gods, who their mythology is a little bit different, because some of their mythologies were known as Mies, which were basically little tiny things. They're instructions. If you wanted to learn how to build a house, you go to the temple and you'd get a me, and there are instructions on how to build a house. There's a lot of different aspects to that. History Net, you wanted to say something.
Oh yeah. No, actually, I just jumped in.
Okay. Well, welcome. Does anybody else have anything to say?
I was talking about the mythologies also have common themes, like in the beginning, like these cultures that are worlds apart all have a story of first man and woman. Not really, but first man and woman as they saw it. A tree of life, a forbidden fruit of some sort, forbidden food of some sort, a fallen paradise, a serpentine divine being that stole immortality from man. Also a global flood. Not really the global flood, but how they saw it.
Well, there is ample evidence, though.
There was no actual global flood. There's just a local flood, the Persian Gulf. But that story is no less common memory.
But you also had stories of from South America, from North America, from China, that all portrayed a flood that archaeologists think happened a little bit around the same time. There's entire civilization on the bed of the Dead Sea.
Yeah, I was just watching. We mentioned this earlier, but I mean, I had just been watching an archaeologist on Joe Rogan's podcast talking about how, yeah, there's substantial evidence that 10, 12,000 years ago, sea levels were 300 feet lower than they are now, and there was a lot more landmass. And there's real evidence for that. And I think the only point I was making about it is that we can't just dismiss mythology. We can't, even if probably the one I would think that was like an example of mythology too that we like is King Arthur and the Round Table and the Knights of the Round Table, right? Now we know most of those stories are not literally true, but there is reason to think that parts of the Arthurian legends, not all of them, obviously, but the parts of them, did happen in some way. That some of these people existed. The history doesn't record Arthur as a specific king, although there's a well. My point is that within most mythology, there's almost always some truth in there somewhere. Almost always, and I think that's an important thing to recognize too.
Yeah, but like there's all this off the wall shit. Like the Greek mythology, the goddess of love and beauty was born out of the castrated genitals of the sky, or the cum swapping episode between Horus and Set, and
Well,
the
okay.
king of the Norse gods being eaten by a wolf during the end times.
The thing is, and I think I made this point earlier, there is also a tendency to primitivize those ancient tales and act like there's no sophistication behind them. But that's like approaching the Bible that way, right? I mean, a lot of those stories likely had spiritual significance and meaning to the people at the time that we're not getting when we just hear the story now, right? That was the point I
Yeah,
was making.
yeah,
About
and,
Arthur. Oh,
yeah. And another thing that's actually pretty interesting is to know how they depicted their gods in the cultures. Like, for example, Greek culture was very humanistic with its depiction of gods. You know, all of their gods were basically look like humans. While if you take Egyptian and Mesopotamian gods, they were either animals or animal human hybrids. Um, so I mean, you know, there was a they Edith Hamilton wrote about this in the book on the subject, where you know, um, where the Greeks were just very much were in love with people, and that was even if you it really reflected their values of hospitality. They were very hospitable people where they were commanded by their gods to be hospitable and to take in people that asked for it.
Yeah, but their gods were petty and cruel.
Oh yeah, but here's the funny thing about this. Here's the funny thing about the Greek gods, though. Even though the Greek gods were to be taken seriously, it was also considered good to laugh at the tales of Zeus's adulterous ways and stuff.
Yeah. Can I say something about King Arthur real quick?
Yes.
They say that King Arthur may have been based on a real life Roman commander who was stationed in what is now Britain, or Britannia as it was called, Roman province, and his name was Lucius Artorius Costus, who was a 3rd century or 2nd or 3rd century Roman commander in Britannia. So I just thought that was really interesting.
You mean
historians believe that he's the what?
You mean Ambrosius? He lived in the 5th century.
Ambrosius?
Yeah, Ambrosius. I think that's
Ambrosius. This Roman commander is named Ambrosius Castus. And,
yeah, I remember.
Well, there's a lot of
It was
debate
based on him.
about.
Yeah, based on him, Alfred the Great, and Charlemagne.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of debate on how old the actual story of King Arthur is, because there's a story that is similar. I I would guess that the Gaelic translation of the main character could have been Arthur, but the the whole idea of Knights of the Round Table and stuff like that, that there was a story similar to that before the Roman occupation of Britain.
Really?
Yes, it's I would have to go through from memory on it because I don't have it written down anywhere. But it was one of the stories that I went through.
I remember the Knights of the Round Table being based on Charlemagne's paladins.
Yes, that is one theory. There's a lot of different theories about King Arthur. Whether or not it was all a story, to told post Roman Empire, or if it happened before the Roman Empire, or if it happened during the Roman occupation. There's still a lot of questions about that. And there are scholars that are actually trying to dig deeper into that.
It was kind of like it's kind of like Sargon of Akkad. His legend grew over time.
Yes.
And it's also like trying to think of what's his name. It's Enkidu. Well, I mean, it's
Gilgamesh and
like Gilgamesh. Yeah, they say Gilgamesh might have been a real king, but all the stories, he was a real king, but the legends grew over time.
Gilgamesh was likely Nimrod.
Yeah, it could be.
Well, Nimrod could have been a king that predated Gilgamesh.
That's what Nimrod means, the rebel. And Gilgamesh's story is the first ever God is dead story.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't really realize about how much of our stories actually do date back. Like our themes for our stories really do date back to, let's say, mythology. We all know Beauty and the Beast, and
there's only so many tropes.
You can find, in Greek mythology, you can find the story of Cupid and Psyche, which is basically, when you extract the themes, is basically the same thing as Beauty and the Beast.
Well, did you know
there's a Cinderella story going all the way back to ancient Egypt?
Yeah, and the story of Aladdin was actually originally Chinese.
Yeah, Chinese.
Yeah.
By Indians, and then when they picked it up and passed it on to Western Europe.
I know, it's very good.
Come to think of it, Mulan was also a historical figure. But we don't know that Mulan.
Oh, Mulan, yeah.
We don't know really if she existed or not. I mean, there's debate on that.
Yeah.
Some think that she was just a story that they told to. We don't know yet. The details is very sketchy.
Well, either way, she's considered to be the Joan of Arc of the East. So,
I mean, what's even funny about that is Joan of Arc gets really blown out of the water too. Is like she wasn't really a military person either, because really she was more like the cheerleader for the French.
Basically, yeah, and she was actually kind of she was feminine at one point, and then she was kind of forced to presume a more guyish personality due to the fact she wanted to prevent herself from being raped by many of the troops on the battlefield.
Well, that's part of it. She also didn't want to actually dress like a woman.
The legend of the Maid of Lorraine was floating around at that time, and she fit the profile. Like the prophet Merlin predicted 1,000 years beforehand.
Yeah, definitely.
And if I also wanted to say something else, is like, to go off of Greek and Roman mythology, we can go into Norse mythology, like with Odin and the rest. What's actually interesting is, when you actually go into if you actually go into the tale of Odin and stuff like that, you can find that the values that the Norse people had were the complete opposite that the Greeks had. Like,
because many,
for example, you go. What you were going to say, Robert?
I was just going to say, like, that's because the Vikings were a Northern European people, along with the Slavs and Balts, and Celtic people. So
No,
Yeah.
but there is speculation that certain Norse gods were worshipped in India as Hindu gods, and then the Indo-Europeans, when they migrated, created their own mythology.
well, because the ancient Greeks had more of a they had more contact with India, that Eurasian trade zone, than the Norse Vikings, or Proto-Vikings, I should say, at this time.
Yes, come to think of it, Sigurd was also a real person, and Brunhilde.
Yeah. Here's a note. What we gotta know about the Norse people wouldn't have considered the Greek gods to be heroic, because to the Norse people, what was considered heroic was not just fighting in battle, but it was also fighting against injustice even when you know you were losing.
Yeah, like in
to the Norse people, the Greek gods, since they were all powerful pretty much, and they were immortal, there was no stakes at it. All of the Norse gods were mortal. They were powerful beings, but they were mortal, and they were gonna eventually die. They're going to eventually die.
Well, they were technically mortal. Mortal. What gave them their immortality was eating the golden apple.
Hell, the Greek gods were mortal also.
Somewhat, not as much as the other gods. There's the whole story of Artemis. Was it Artemis? It's the archer. The archer the goddess of the hunt and of war. According to the story, she had a bow and arrow, and that was the only thing that could kill the gods of Mount Olympus. It was
the Emperor's bow.
Yeah. With the differences between Norse mythology, between the Greek and Norse mythology, you had the idea of the world tree, and the world
the many trees of life.
Right, but the roots of the world tree, the races that inhabit the roots of the world tree are like the dwarves and gnomes and stuff, and then up on the top of the tree, that's where the elves are, which elves in Norse mythology are winged creatures. And
the Valkyries. They would carry the bravest Viking warriors up to Valhalla, where they enjoyed the afterlife forever, fighting and feasting forever, where their wounds miraculously healed night after night.
Well, actually, like with them, the whole thing with the Norse gods was that, if you died and you got to go to Valhalla, basically all you were doing is you were staying there temporarily until Ragnarok.
It's interesting about Ragnarok is that's one of the few pagan stories that actually talk about in end times about reality as we know it ending. There's a few things in Eastern mythology, but for the most part, other than that's the whole idea of end times, it seems to be monotheistic, and it's weird because the Norse mythology well before before Christianity had this entire this is how the world began, this is how the world is going to end, and when the world ends, the things will be switched. Thor will become the All-Father. Hell will come up from the underworld, and instead of her being controlling of the underworld, she'd be controlling an aspect of the living. Hell is the goddess of the dead. And it's everything. Just Loki goes from a trickster god to, I forget what he is. I think he's sent to be the god of the underworld. I forget Ragnarok.
Where'd you get the idea that the gods were all wiped out in Greek mythology?
Well, the idea that the whole Perseus
God of
epic.
War.
No,
The
it wasn't
whole
Perseus. He didn't. Oh, he just slew Medusa.
well, he did more than slew Medusa. That wasn't the end of the story. He
I know.
went to fight the Gorgon for some reason, and then that branched off of another quest. The story of Perseus actually goes on for like 4 or 5 stories, with the ending of him saying that the gods are petty and cruel,
Well, yeah.
and he actually went to war against them.
I think that carried off to Hercules, didn't it?
Hercules and Perseus were supposedly friends.
Well, they were all related
was
if you think
Hercules'
about it.
great grandfather.
Yeah, and I was also going in, like in my video, like part 8 of my series. What I did is I went into bonus myths, legends, and folk tales, and I actually got into the North American Indians. The Choctaws. I can't pronounce it, but
Oh yeah, fun fact.
basically,
Go ahead.
yeah. Well, I mean, basically, with the Choctaw Indians, they believed that there was a mountain that had a passage from the top of the caverns to under the earth, and these caverns arose the Choctaws along with the ants. The Choctaws killed the ants' mother and called on their god Abba, to close the exit of the mountain, which locked the remaining people in there, and they later transformed into ants.
Oh yeah, fun fact.
What?
You know the Vikings landed in North America 5 centuries before Columbus?
Well, yeah.
Temporarily.
Although their findings were pretty much nothing, because they pretty much stayed there for they did really nothing with the land and they went back.
Yeah, because they got their asses kicked.
Well,
they didn't have guns or anything like the. Yeah.
Wasn't that in Newfoundland? Yeah, Newfoundland or something like that. It's some part of Canada.
I believe Erickson.
It wasn't even a big portion. There's from what I could see, there was an iron mining, not an iron mining, but a place for iron smelting that they found, and they found a couple structures and a couple satellite structures.
Another fun fact, that all these cultures having common motifs, like they were all aware of giants also, and guess what tales certain Native American tribes had about giants? These have these semi-divine offspring that that God inspired them to kill off the Great Spirit, drive out from their land.
You know who else has stories about giants?
Nephilim. The Nephilim.
Well, that's not
people
all.
In New York.
That's not all That's not all of giants.
I'm saying they're in every culture.
Yeah, they're in every culture, but I wouldn't call them Nephilim. For there does seem to be evidence in through oral history that there was a race of gigantic humanoids on Earth. And there could be multiple reasons why we haven't found any evidence of that. We could have found evidence of that
because they were partially divine. Their bodies really no physical trace.
Well, yeah, yeah, but I mean, there's all these accounts though. There's a grain of truth in every mythology because deep down the whole purpose of mythology was to tell the story, tell the history of the human, that area of where humans were.
Even the gods were real in a sense. They just weren't gods.
Yeah,
they were lesser divine beings that God allotted territory to on Earth. Then they rebelled.
Analytic alchemist wants to say something.
Yeah, we actually have quite a bit of evidence for giants. We have a lot of archaeological digs and newspaper articles from the late 1800s into the, I mean, from the mid 1800s into the early-ish 1900s that affirmed these digs, and they were published by the Smithsonian Institute itself, actually. You can't find these anymore, though, oddly enough. And I'm going to be doing a few videos on the Smithsonian really soon on my channel, because I do think they are involved in a conspiracy to cover up evidence of giants.
Be careful to jump to that conclusion, though.
Well, I mean, the person who not created, but who discovered the Galapagos Islands, the original his original report of the scouting was that there was a civilization there, and that the human looking beings that were there, they were tall, and they had like this weird thing going on with their earlobes and stuff. And then I think it was 20 years after that report, when people came to the Galapagos Islands, they saw nothing but, or no, it was the Easter Islands. I'm sorry, not the Galapagos Islands, but the Easter Islands, the one with the island with all those big heads that, you know, we don't actually have any real explanation for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been talking to an archaeologist from my state named Jim Vieira about giants, and he actually has a book out that I would recommend people read. Would you mind if I plug that here?
Go right ahead.
Yes.
Okay. Let me pull it up. You guys can talk about anything while I find this.
Well, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of weird things with giants, specifically, because that the whole thing the whole thing about giants, giant mythology, and the different evidence that of giants is really something that the ancient astronaut theorists are big on. And let's pull up this. All right, here we go.
Screen share that or not.
By Richard J. Dewars, The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America.
His book's called Giants on Record, America's Hidden History. And the author is Jim Vieira, and I think it's co-authored with Hugh Newman, who is, I believe, another archaeologist.
Here it is. Hold on, let me screen share this. All right. Giants on Record.
Mm-hmm.
2015, Jim Vieira, author, and Hugh Newman, author. And then, you know, we have other books on this, the missing skeletons of the giants, which it could be the American giants would be the Sasquatches, because they're reported to be 7 feet, 8 feet tall. That's another, you know, mythological
They were
creature.
described as being red and hairy.
Right, and that's one of the few mythological creatures that are actually, you know, confined to North America. They seem to be, the Native Americans have the story of the Sasquatches in the Skunk Ape. You know, from the Northwest all the way down to Florida, the Seminole Indians in Florida have stories about a Sasquatch type of creature. And Sasquatches are giant and hairy. I think 7 to 8 feet tall is a median of.
Yeah. In a lot of the newspaper articles that I've read from over 100 years ago, the average size seems to be anywhere from 9 to 18 feet, actually.
Okay, that makes more sense. You know, but the I'm just going off of the 20th century Bigfoot sightings and the
No,
Sas.
let's not get into that.
Well, I mean it's you know there are illegitimate Bigfoot sightings, but there are also fairly credible sightings in places like in Maine and in Oregon in the 20th century of people who were camping in these national forests, and they experienced
If there,
you know
if there were giants still alive, they wouldn't be hiding from us.
I mean maybe not.
Well,
You know,
stories from various Native
They'd be
American
conquering.
tribes say that they
They'd
were
be
Well,
conquering. They'd be
well, I mean,
conquering and
either that
enslaving
or they
like
would
they
be.
did in the past.
Well, either that or they'd be in the NBA.
Yeah.
well,
yeah, history net. It's not that's not necessarily the case. A lot of stories from various native tribes say that they were hiding from them because they were at war with the humans.
But they wouldn't need to fear humans. They overpowered humans. That's why
no.
the Israelites were scared shitless even when they had God on their side.
Well, not necessarily. If you look up the story of the Lovelock Cave out in Nevada, the giants fled from them, and actually the story goes that the native peoples there actually cornered them in a cave and set fire to the cave and burnt them all alive.
Because they had God on their side.
Yeah, could be.
The Great Spirit.
I mean, and some of the Native American stories, yes, there does seem to be a war, but there's other tribes that actually, according to their stories, lived with these creatures. You know, you know, like the Seminole Indians, for example. Their stories about the skunk ape or the southern Sasquatch is is one of symbiotic, a symbiotic relationship, because they would go, they would actually trade with these creatures in some sense. You also had the Hopi tribes, which the cave paintings and stuff like that. Um, that's a weird thing that ancient astronaut theorists like to go on, because the Hopi Indians, they had like all sorts of different paintings in their caves, and one of them was of giant humans trading with them and being peaceful with them. It's
Mhm.
if
Ancient aliens theory has been debunked to the moon and back. Pun intended.
not necessarily. I mean, you have a lot of things that people claim have been debunked that have not actually been debunked. Like there are people who claim that evolution debunks certain things, but evolution itself, there's holes within evolution. It's not really an observable thing, and it's not something that can be tested. It's something that will have to it will have to be observed in thousands of years. It's observable, kind of, but that's dependent on what kind of record we have, and it wasn't until very recently that we started actually measuring these things. So we don't know how much has changed in the 100,000 years since humans popped up on this planet. And we do have archaeological evidence that has 100,000-year-old skeleton, Homo sapien skeleton. It predates the mitochondrial Eve. It's a fairly recent discovery.
Well, not that reason. The mitochondrial Eve is the ancestor of all humans living today. Not humans in general.
But supposedly.
No, she lived 200,000 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, another story I'd like to get into is like a folk tale. It's a common one about John Henry. This was, an American folk tale. This is basically about a black man who lived in Black River Country.
Yeah.
We know about these stories they go all the way back to the 1870s. And he was a guy that he was known for his work ethic, and he would defeat a steam drill with sledgehammer
Like a
and
black,
drilling into a mountain.
like a black Paul Bunyan.
Pretty much, except he wasn't a giant.
Yeah.
Which
Well, the whole entire tall tale of both Paul Bunyan and John Henry were stories that were against automation. Because John Henry, the whole idea of John Henry is he was trying to, lay down track faster than a machine. Paul Bunyan was trying to, cut down trees faster than a machine. Both of them couldn't do it.
And there's different times where people think Robin Hood lived, but he's a mythical character, I know, but there could have been a thief that inspired him, steal from the rich, give to the poor, but we don't have a definitive characteristic of him.
Right.
We do have a guy like that. We got trying to think of his name. God. Never mind. I can't remember him.
There was a nobleman named Sir Robin of Locksley, whose father was.
Was this during around the time of the Third Crusade?
Yeah,
that's the time.
It was around the Third Crusade. Yes.
Yeah.
And whether or not the entire folklore of Sherwood Forest and all that happened, it could have happened, but it's. I think it was more of a story against the corruption of
shrouded in legend, like King Arthur.
Yeah, it was shrouded in legend, and it provided a tale to tell kids and adults about about a certain aspect of when it is okay to steal, type of thing. Because it at the time the British government was fairly corrupt. There was corrupt elements of the British government during that time. It is very well documented. So I would say it's possible.
What do you make of Romulus? Do you think he exists?
The whole story of Romulus,
I know the sucking on a wolf's teeth to survive, that was bullshit, but
well,
I think there was a first king.
Well, how do you know? You weren't there.
I mean, dog milk can actually nourish a newborn baby.
No one hasn't watched Princess Mononoke.
You would know. You would know. I mean, wait. How would you know that? Are you been up to anything, man?
Well, no. It's one of the few mammals that if you really need to, because cow's milk really isn't good for a baby. It's not really good until like you're past your toddler ages.
We're not talking about Jungle Book here, man.
Well, no. I mean the human body cannot actually the human body when you're a baby cannot actually process cow's milk. That's why they tell you when you have a kid, do not give them cow's milk until the age of 3. But
that's what women's boobs were made for.
There's some mammals that have that their lactation does seem to have a little bit more nourishing aspects. And the canine, there's a study like done in the 70s about this. Which was going on with Dances with Wolves, because the whole there is a folklore trope of a human that is raised by animals, essentially. It happens enough throughout multiple different cultures that I would think that at least one or two there's at least one or two of those
No,
instances.
no. Dances
kind of
with Wolves. That was a Civil War cavalry man that was fascinated, wanted to see the frontier before it was industrialized, and he led them on the Sioux
Oh,
tribe.
that's right. I forget. I forgot. I'm sorry. I was thinking of the Jungle Book.
How did you get those mixed up?
I don't know. Jack London and
Well, it's all the wolf's milk that he's been sucking.
yeah.
He's not able to tell the difference between Jungle Book and Tarzan.
Well, Tarzan
Yeah.
was Tarzan.
Yeah.
Was on Africa.
I also got into Hindu mythology, where about the story of Rajai or whatever. You know, he was basically a man, you know, who just a regular guy who basically took the throne of a storm god named Indra, and basically Brahma had just said, like, there was this war going on between the gods and the demons, and basically that Brahma said whoever is on Raja's side will win. So both the gods and the demons bribed him, but he ultimately chose the gods, so the gods won.
That's
And-
interesting because in
Something interesting about
go ahead.
Hindu. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, basically what happened is that Raja, you know, would be made king afterwards, and he would overthrow Indra, the storm god, and he'd make Indra the deputy of heaven. And here's the thing: as after Raja had died, Indra refused to acknowledge Raja's sons to the right to the throne and took back the throne for himself.
Indra may have been originally been Thor. No, Thor may have been original.
Well, I do know that that in the old Indus Valley civilization, Indra was like the top god until the Aryan invasion. I'm getting my centuries mixed up here, but and then when the Aryan invasions came along, Indra was more relegated to like a secondary god.
Actually, we don't know anything about the Indus Valley religion.
Yeah, no, we're
Except that
we're talking about the Aryan invasion, where the Aryans came from South India, correct?
It came from the
what is now actually
It came from the mountains.
Well, I mean, there's stories in Indian folklore where there is a group of people that called themselves Aryan that originated from, you know, some part of southern India. It is possible that they originated from Antarctica, but that's an interesting continent, because there's been so many discoveries on that continent, and it's all been, you know, not shared with the public.
But anyway, back to their mythology. We don't know anything about the Indus religion, but we get the.
We know some stuff.
I mean, we don't really know a lot about the Indica Valley.
We know Krishna lived during that time, but other than that, we don't know very much about the gods because their formal scriptures weren't written until
And this is all oral what I'm talking about too. So,
well, with the Inca Valley civilization, the interesting thing about that is that they didn't actually find any implements of war within that area, but the civilization disappeared. It was a civilization that they found Roman coins in, you know, Roman and Greek coins. So the Romans and the Greeks did you know, do trade, and it's possible that the Chinese and other Asians did trade with them as well. It's just it's one of the many civilizations that were a peaceful civilization that
China didn't really rise. Go ahead.
Oh, the Romans didn't really rise at this time either, but I think it was like the earliest. It's a mythical dynasty. The earliest Chinese dynasty at the time of the Indus Valley civilization would have been the mythical Xia dynasty.
Yeah,
but yeah, they could have had trade.
There could have been a dynasty like that, but they were more chieftains, not kings, until like the around the time of David. That's when China began to be relevant.
I mean, the history, you know, I would say is you know, is relevant. You know, even before that, it would be an interesting history if Mao Zedong didn't destroy the history that he didn't agree with.
Oh yeah, if he didn't destroy all of Buddhist temples and ancient Chinese religious sites, we could have had a whole bunch more knowledge right now.
Well, with the interesting thing about the Buddhist based the Buddhist based mythologies, other than the dragon conundrum, all the dragons in the East are peaceful and they are they're purveyors of wisdom, where the dragons of the West are all beasts that will kill us all, and murderous beasts type of thing. It
Go ahead.
it's one of the weird things. But the Asian mythologies are very interesting.
That's another common motif, the dragons,
Yeah,
all over the world.
and it is possible. I think it is possible that dragons did exist.
You know, the Nazis had a huge interest in Tibet, areas like Tibet and Nepal, because they believed it was like, where what they thought was the Aryan, race that had invaded India. As we know, the original Aryans, who were not Nazis, they were not proto-Nazis,
Or
but
white.
they believed that they could. What?
Or white.
Yeah. They believe that they could excavate these areas in what is now Tibet and Nepal, and bring back, loot the artifacts. But unfortunately for them, the war broke out in Europe before they could actually do any serious excavating. Hitler sent a group into Tibet, a German excavation team to Tibet, and one of the leaders was named Heinrich Carrier. And he eventually, when the war broke out in Europe, he got captured and sent to a POW camp in India, and then escaped from that, went to Tibet, and he stayed there until the communist invasion, and that's where he had to flee Tibet again.
Wasn't that there's a story that there's a movie that Brad Pitt was in.
Yeah, it's called 7 Years in Tibet. That was the same name of his book too, 7 Years in Tibet.
I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about mythology. It's mythology was primarily like I've said before. I'm going to say it again. Is primarily a way that early humans used to tell not just how things were, but history as well. Like there various mythologies like to say that there were civilizations prior to the Greek civilizations. Prior, the Egyptian mythologies said there's civilizations prior to the Egyptian mythology. Egypt, there's there's mythologies within Egyptian mythology that said all of northern Africa was a lush and green place, and not the desert it is that we see it is today. It was much more green during the Bronze Ages than it is today, as well. That's seen from records when we started actually writing. When the Bronze Age was about the time when written history started to become the thing that our species did. But yeah, to address our good friend.
And there's also the similarities of gods in other cultures. That the Greeks and Egyptians have identified certain gods as each other's and Canaanite gods, and
yeah, there's that.
Like Ra and Utu or Shamash were the same god, and it's probably it would probably stand to reason that if Ra was the overlord of the so-called gods, that he was also revered in South America as Inti.
I mean, it is possible. It is also possible that that all these different gods are just different perspectives on the same god. And to address Charlie Reed that dragons existed. Yes, I think dragons did exist. I think that you have the Leviathan story from Jewish mythology, which is a river dragon. You have also within Jewish
with the big
mythology.
personification of watery chaos.
Yeah,
That we see commonly also.
Also within Jewish mythology pre Moses, and even post Moses, there was the stories of God was fighting against these dragon like creatures before he created existence. Like the in there's the angels, the pantheon of angels existed prior to humans being created. That they were created for primarily for war, but they were also messengers between the created beings. But it just seems like the angels, their main purpose was war. And why would you have war if if there wasn't some kind of threat? And you also have the dragons of the up in the Norse mythologies. You have the dragons, and I think there's the Wotan. And
same thing. Also in China, also in the Americas.
Yeah, and whether or not they actually breathe fire, that's I mean, that could be possible. I mean, you could have something like alcohol coming out of a gland, but it's more or bioluminescent essence of some kind that is exuded could do something like fire does. But as far as
it could be like how what the Komodo dragon does, where it spits at you and it feels like you've been hit by fire.
Right.
Don't be going Ken Ham there.
No, I mean there's a lot of possibilities though, as far as we can't discount everything. We can't discount everything just because we don't have an example in the modern day of it. Because humans can breathe fire. You take some really high proof alcohol, spit it out in front of a flame, you're breathing fire. I would say that if dragons did breathe fire, something, it would be something like that. There'd be some kind, that is if they actually breathe fire. But that was only in Western Europe. The mythological dragons of South America, of the Middle East, well, not the Middle East, but the eastern areas, the Asian areas, didn't breathe fire.
Quetzalcoatl was one of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's to say that it wasn't possible though. There's I think is kind of a stretch. To say that it was possible is kind of a stretch as well, because we truly don't know if an animal like that existed. If it did exist, more than likely humans hunted it out of existence, much like we did to every other carnivorous predator on this planet, primarily, with the exception of Africa. But Africa is basically one huge continent, nature preserve. The entire continent is nature preserve, because humans, have been hunting predators for our own protection to extinction in some cases.
Anyway, Brass, what were you saying? I keep interrupting.
Yeah, and I just think this whole mythology series is pretty good.
This is a fascinating talk, Robin. Sorry.
Yeah, I liked doing the research for it. I read 2 books on the subject. I read one by Edith Hamilton, and I read another one by Mercatante. Mercante went more in depth with the folklore and mythologies in there than Edith Hamilton did. Edith Hamilton more or less focused on the Greek and Roman gods, while at the very end going into the Norse gods. But the Encyclopedia of Mythology by Mercante is pretty top-notch scholarly stuff.
You know what?
I thought it was very interesting learning.
We don't have much sources on the Norse mythology. They go earlier than the 10th century AD or the.
Because most of those
that's really because Christians wiped out pretty much all the Norse people.
Oh, yeah, that too.
When in doubt, blame the Christians.
When in doubt,
well, no, there's
true to some extent.
There is legit reason though to get angry at Christians with that, because that is true. They did do that.
Yeah,
It's true. It's true also in the case of like the Baltic mythology too. Much of the Baltic mythology, like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, doesn't exist anymore because the crusading Catholic order known as the Teutonic Knights and the Livonian Sword Brothers just like wiped out all the old Baltic paganism.
Yeah.
I mean, with that though, there's the Catholics, didn't do it just because they were Christian though. The barbarian tribes of Western Europe were a threat to people.
That's true.
But can you really blame them? Like, they've been fighting Romans for centuries.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's true because you look up before too. You had the constant trials and tribulations of the migration period when you had groups like the Vikings and the Arab Muslims pillaging both southern and northern Europe. So, by the time the High Middle Ages came around, hold on. So by the time the High Middle Ages came around in the 11th century, Western Christendom was ready to strike back. So, I'm done.
Well, with that, you had that stuff going on in Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, we had the Eastern Europeans were more fighting with the Muslims essentially in the Middle East. What?
And the Slavs. Don't forget the Slavic people too. They kept pillaging the Byzantine Empire.
And here's what's funny, when the Crusades were happening and the Genghis Khan and stuff got caught up in the middle of those battles. Guess who was the only people to have religious tolerance?
The Mongols.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Mongols were the only people that had the religious tolerance during the time.
Yeah, because they sacked everyone.
Yeah, they believed all the religions they came in contact with had a common source, and they were right. But
and when they were pillaging Russia, the only thing they left intact were the churches there.
And the funny thing is that anti-theists get all in a hissy about the Crusades, even though Genghis Khan's rampage was 4 times worse.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's some new historical theories actually.
Well, actually, wait. Just so you get it, you actually said the name wrong. It's not actually Genghis Khan. It's Chinggis Khan.
Or Temujin, whatever.
Oh yeah. Well, Chinggis Khan is actually a title. It's not really a name.
I know. That's why I said Temujin.
It's sort of like, it's like, it's sort of how we call Donald Trump the President of the United States.
Yeah.
It's like the same thing. It's just a title. It's not referring to any specific. The name in of itself doesn't refer to anyone specific. Temujin is typically who we mean by Genghis Khan or Chinggis Khan for better.
I don't know about that, but I was about to say that there are new historical theories that suggest that the reason why Russia, the Middle East, and China advances west because they're still suffering the Mongol destruction that happened in their countries in the 13th centuries or 13th century. I mean,
that's also funny that the Mongol Empire was even bigger than the Roman Empire, and they were just nomads as compared to a professional militaristic society like Rome.
Well, that's part of the reason why they were able to expand, because they were so decentralized. This idea of the emperor and state authority and whatnot. Whereas opposed to Mongols, they just ruled over pretty dense, or not densely, pretty spacey land.
Although the Romans did fight people that were Mongol-like, or they have some kind of ancestral connections. Yeah. Attila brought the Roman Empire to its knees, and then the Visigoths finished them off later.
Well, you had a bunch of different things happening with the Mongols at the time. Tingri is actually an interesting.
Their version of God.
Well, it's their version of religion. Tingri is Tingriism, in particular is a fairly what's the word? It's very complex. Well, it's a fairly complex thing. And it's weird. I mean, it's weird as far as how Western pagan religions were structured, and how other East, like Buddhism and the different forms of spiritualism in China at that time. It was kind of based on war, but not really. It's
well,
not.
a good thing that's also nice to know about it is that what we know about progress is usually the idea of moral progress is actually a Christian invention, because it's not really found in Eastern or like pagan mythology. Because a lot in Indian mythology, because with a lot of Indians, they believed in the eternal now, where they believed, they didn't believe in a past or future. They believed just in the now. And with Eastern religions, they believe that it's eternal and we're just going through a cycle.
And depending on the Hindu you talk to, that all the Hindu gods are just aspects of the one God, Brahman.
Yeah. And, so Christianity was the only one that had linear time frame, and it was directly for religious reasons, because basically it was seen as, before Christ was a time of sin and after Christ was a time of redemption. So they had reasons to judge moral progress on like a linear level, while the Eastern and the Indians and the pagans didn't have that model, because they didn't have that redemption model in it.
Yeah, BC were some crazy times.
Well, the whole idea of redemption is fairly new as far as humans are concerned. It's just like the idea that slavery is bad. Is something that pretty much most of humanity has accepted. And that was only 100 years ago. And it well, a little bit more than 100 years now, but 1860s was around when this was actually accepted by a majority of humans. There is still slavery that is happening today. We just have it in the prisons. We outsource the slavery to the white men, to the government, in the prisons. That's what the 14th Amendment has a loophole with that. It's like slavery is okay as long as it's the prison system. Well, with indentured servitude was called the it was okay to be a part of, but that was changed in, I think, in mid 20th century. Where they said no, slavery is never okay. The only actual places in the world that slavery is being practiced is in Saudi Arabia and another country.
China.
Well, partially, but it's a country that that has been funding Al Jazeera. I forget the name of it.
England.
No, the English basically ended slavery by colonizing Africa and deposing the African kings that sold their political enemies and rival tribes into slavery.
How about North Korea?
Yeah. I wonder if Eric is Analytic Alchemist still here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you haven't got a chance to say anything. You say you got anything to say about the whole mythology stuff?
I think not, because I'm not too versed in a lot of this stuff.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think what it is was very fascinating when I was going through this research is just the ideas like they shared similarities in a lot of ways where they always tried to like stories of love, like the quick love, like love at first sight. That was a big thing back then, which is actually pretty funny
a lot easier than
because
today, where you have to work to get to know a woman.
well, yeah. But I mean, here's what's funny about people don't tend to think about is like back then, romantic love was sort of like an ideal, but it wasn't like something that really they was really justified enough to marry for someone.
I mean, it's not like they had they had many restaurants back then you could go on a date with, and
well, yeah, and here's like pretty much for most of our time frame, for most of our history, love was not really the essential thing to marriage. It was more or less all marriages were arranged. And, people like to say that's sexist against women. I said, you don't know the guy. Maybe the guy doesn't want to get married to the woman. You don't know him. They're like neither one had the choice.
Well, marriage was primarily a way of uniting families.
And doing politics.
And doing politics, yes. Where the peasants, it was a little bit different, but with the peasants, there was still arranged marriages for different reasons.
Even the gods got married.
Well, yeah, but it's as far as humans went in the Bronze Ages up until fairly recently, up until like the 1800s, so about the 19th century. It was just accepted as the idea of marrying for love really didn't come about until I would say around the Romantic period. But I'm not entirely sure on that.
It happened. It came about due to the Industrial Revolution.
The concept of childhood came around after that time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, I mean, childhood, as we know, is a social construct. It's completely dependent on the society you're living in. What constitutes childhood.
I was going to say, in the Jewish tradition, once you hit 13, you're considered to be a man. That's what the whole bar mitzvah thing is about.
Yeah.
Well, there's actual reasons for that, though. Humans didn't always live until their 60s on average. They 30s was considered elderly in the Bronze Ages. And you were an elder if you actually survived until you're 30, and that was a lot harder than it is today. A lot more people can die of old age than during a time when civilization as we know it was barely created. Not saying that civilization.
Then there's a modern mythology, like the worst of which is what we call the Christ myth theory.
That's not more of a myth. That's more of a conspiracy theory.
It's the myth that Jesus it's the myth that Jesus never walked the earth, and the conspiracy that the big bad Christian scholars are pulling the strings and influencing the decisions of the atheist scholars, agnostic scholars, Jewish scholars.
Well,
Pagan scholars.
That's not necessarily true, but okay. Um, with that whole thing, that whole conspiracy theory, it's it's kind of a the Arianism 2.0. Aryan Christianity was basically they didn't believe Jesus was in a corporeal body. Um, the Aryan Christianity, which is not Aryan, but Arian. It is very important to notice that distinction there. It wasn't based on whiteness or anything like that. It was based primarily that Jesus did not have a physical body, and he materialized so people can see them, but when he was crucified, he never actually died because he didn't exist in a corporeal body.
The mythology of the cosmic sperm bank.
Yeah, essentially. It was the Arian heresy, which it was a heresy. It was decided as a heresy after debate. There a lot of the things that were decided. A lot of the early Christian, a lot of the patristic writings, which is very important to understanding Christianity. They were all debates. It was they were either debating the Arians or they were debating the Gnostic Christians. But a lot of the big long writings that we actually study as Christians were debates with these people, and you can actually with these different points of view in the early times. Like this whole idea that Jesus never existed was addressed in the 2nd or 3rd century.
No, that hasn't come up until the 18th century.
Well, no, Arian Christianity existed, in the 2nd and 3rd.
They just saw him as a purely celestial being, but they didn't argue that it never existed. Well,
they argued he didn't exist in a body, in a corporeal form, which isn't the same. But that's why I'm saying it's like the resurgence of that idea, basically. But it's now 11:09.
Yes.
We started.
There's a new guy. Go ahead.
We started about 9:30ish. It's 11:09, and we gotta do things. I gotta go do things. So, anybody have any final thoughts on mythology?
Yeah. Like I said, this was a great. I'm glad to have been able to do the Mythos series. It'd be good. I have a bunch of other projects in store for later on, and I hope when I eventually edit all this out and put it all together later on, it'll all be just a very good thing. As always, this is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.
All right, Analytic Alchemist, do you have anything to say?
Sure. Giants existed, and the Smithsonian sucks.
Okay. HistoryNet, do you have anything?
Not really. Other than there's mythology has bits and pieces of truth to it, but it's mostly fragmented and distorted. But there's the source materials are no less true in essence.
All right. Comrade Dimitri, do you have anything you want?
I just want to add this was an excellent conversation we had about movies, so hope to do it again.
All right. I want to apologize to Misanthropic Zombie. I apologize. We're cutting the we're not cutting it short, but I apologize that I didn't actually invite you. Thank you for telling us our public Discord chat link is not working. I be sure to. I mean, this was a good conversation. It hopefully it got some people to think. And be sure to do the thing that you normally do on YouTube, as far as the whole drill about liking and subscribing and all that other jazz. Tell your friends and enemies about us, and God bless everybody.